Could you please introduce yourself and tell us your involvement with Imagine No Malaria?
Well, my name is Becky Buxton, and I teach microbiology at the University of Utah. I primarily teach students in the medical laboratory science program, but also I've been involved with the University of Utah's Global Health Alliance. So a lot of what we have been doing is outreach work in West Africa, and particularly in Ghana. And so we've had the opportunities to do laboratory evaluations on site in Ghana, where malaria is being diagnosed and treated, and we've observed some of the patients in acute stages of malaria and near-death experiences from malaria. So I also have a passion for the work of the church and the ministry. Formerly I was the sub-district lay leader in Utah, and so got to know some of the people around the office, and they asked me back to be the science nerd on the Imagine No Malaria committee. So germs are me, and germs are my passion, so that's why I'm here. So are African children. And so I think the other reason I'm here, I think, is that way back in 1971, I worked with the Girl Scouts, or I actually was selected by the Girl Scouts to go to a Jubilee celebration in Ghana, and I came back with a heart for the children, and a lot of this is about the children. Mm-hmm. So they're precious and they're still being killed, so that's why I'm here.
Thank you. So since you are our resident science nerd, what are some of the scientific pieces of information that are important for us to know as we go about Imagine No Malaria?
So the science, I think that the general public doesn't understand what a complex disease this is and why it's such an issue. And I think the science behind it, even to a person who doesn't have a mind for science, is fascinating, because it's a very interesting organism. It's not like a fly lands on your food, or a fly lands on the outhouse and then lands on your food and you get salmonella. This is a very complex life cycle. The mosquito has to bite a person that has malaria, and then the organism goes through a big transformation within the mosquito before it can infect another person. So in one case, that's an opportunity to stop the disease, because it doesn't go straight from person to person to person. It has to go through a development stage in the mosquito. So it's not like the mosquito is just a vector. The mosquito is an essential part of its life cycle. So killing the mosquito was the number one thing we could do. I can remember my professor's voice in my head saying over and over again, the main reason we don't have malaria in the US is because we have screens on our houses. And the equivalent of that in Africa is nets over our beds. So I was so enthusiastic about nothing but nets, that we can do the same thing there by putting nets over the houses. The other piece of the science is that it's a vicious organism. There are three different types of malaria that affect humans. One of them causes a lingering disease that can last for 30, 40 years and makes a person mildly ill. They might not even know they have it. Another one causes an acute disease that can recur because the organism can hang out in a person's liver, but it doesn't usually kill them. The number of organisms doesn't get high enough in the bloodstream that it's going to kill them. Unfortunately, the kind that's in West Africa, or in most of the continent of Africa, is a species that's called Plasmodium falciparum. And this organism, when the mosquito bites you, it goes straight to your liver, and it starts to infect the cells and multiplies. 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8. And this organism, unlike the others, makes many, many more copies of itself before it bursts out of the liver into the bloodstream. Then when it goes into the bloodstream part of the life cycle, it multiplies itself again many, many more times. So it infects many more blood cells, and the number of multiplying cells in each red blood cell, the number of multiplying parasites in each red blood cell, is dramatically more than it is in the others. So the next part of the life cycle, mosquito bites you, parasite goes to your liver, it multiplies, it bursts out into your red blood cells, or into your bloodstream, then it multiplies in your blood cells. Unfortunately, the next thing that happens is it has to burst all those red blood cells. So the first time this happens, a small percentage, and you might get a little bit of fever from it. But then each one of those goes and infects another red blood cell. And the problem with falciparum malaria is it can infect a lot of blood cells really quickly. And all of a sudden, you're losing a third of your blood supply when it goes through one of its replication cycles. And it's not exactly bleeding to death, it's bursting all of your red blood cells. Your immune system goes into hyperdrive. That's not compatible with life. The other thing about this species is that it's got little knobs on the outside of, it causes little knobs to form on the outside of your red blood cells. So your red blood cells are usually just kind of like frisbees. They're kind of biconcave discs, and they float around pretty nicely. The malaria parasites makes little knobs to form on the outside, and the unfortunate thing is they get stuck in your little capillaries, especially in your brain and in your kidneys. So malaria, the falciparum malaria, is sometimes referred to as black water fever, because the blood cells that are going through your kidneys are being caught and burst, and instead of passing just blood, it's black water. It's the hemolyzed blood. So that's one of the bad symptoms, and the other is that it can get into your brain and cause coma and death. So
is that what's referred to as cerebral malaria?
the cerebral malaria is when it gets into your brain. Yes, indeed. Yeah, and the multiplying or the production of the gametes, the male and the female, it's got a sexual and an asexual cycle. The production of that usually happens in the kidneys and in the brain, not as much in the circulating blood as it does with some of the others. So they're released into, the gametes are then released into the bloodstream, and that's what the mosquito has to suck up in order to reinfect. But boy meets girl in the mosquito, not in the human. So the mosquito has to suck up one of each of the gametes. It has to go on, and boy meets girl in the mosquito, and then their progeny is what has to infect the human. So as you can see, it's an extremely complex disease, and it's a fascinating disease to study, and that's just barely hitting the surface.